Chapter 8 of Robin Hood by J. Walker McSpadden. This recording is in the public domain. How Allan a Dale's wooing was prospered. "What is thy name?" then said Robin Hood. "Come tell me without any fail." "By the faith of my body," then said the young man, "my name it is Allan a Dale." Friar Tuck and Much, the miller's son, soon became right good friends over the steaming stew they jointly prepared for the merry men that evening. Tuck was mightily pleased when he found a man in the forest who could make pasties and who had cooked for no less person than the High Sheriff himself, while Much marveled at the friar's knowledge of herbs and simples and woodland things which savored a stew greatly. So they gabbled together like two old gossips, and between them made such a tasty mess that Robin Hood and his stout followers were like never to leave off eating. And the friar said grace, too, with great unction, over the food, and Robin said amen, and that henceforth they were always to have mass of Sundays. So Robin walked forth into the wood that evening with his stomach full and his heart therefore in great contentment and love for other men. He did not stop the first passer by, as his manner often was, and desire a fight. Instead, he stepped behind a tree when he heard a man's voice in song, and waited to behold the singer. Perhaps he remembered also the merry chanting of Will Scarlet, and how he had tried to give it pause a few days before. Like Will, this fellow was clad in scarlet, though he did not look quite as fine a gentleman. Natheless, he was a sturdy yeoman of honest face and a voice far sweeter than Will's. He seemed to be a strolling minstrel, for he bore a harp in his hand, which he thrummed, while his lusty tenor voice rang out with, "Hey down and a down and a down, I've a lassie back in the town. Come day, come night, come dark or light, she will wed me back in the town." Robin let the singer pass, caroling on his way. "'Tis not in me to disturb a light-hearted lover this night," he muttered, a memory of Marian coming back to him. "Pray heaven she may be true to him and the wedding a gay one, back in the town." So Robin went back to his camp where he told of the minstrel. "If any of ye set on him after this," quoth he in ending, "bring him to me, for I would have speech with him." The very next day his wish was gratified. Little John and Much, the miller's son, were out together on a foraging expedition when they espied the same young man. At least they thought it must be he, for he was clad in scarlet and carried a harp in his hand. But now he came drooping along the way. His scarlet was all in tatters, and at every step he fetched a sigh. "Alack and a well a day!" Then stepped forth Little John and Much, the miller's son. "Ho! Do not wet the earth with your weeping," said Little John, "else we shall all have lumbago." No sooner did the young man catch sight of them than he bent his bow, and held an arrow back to his ear. Stand off," he said. "What is your will with me?" "Put by your weapon," said Much. "We will not harm you, but you must come before our master straight, under yon greenwood tree." So the minstrel put by his bow and suffered himself to be led before Robin Hood. "How now," quoth Robin, when he beheld his sorry countenance, "are you not he whom I heard no longer ago than yesternight caroling so blithely about a lassie back in the town?" "The same in body, good sir," replied the other sadly, "but my spirit is grievously changed." "Tell me your tale," said Robin courteously. "Belike I can help you." "That can no man on earth, I fear," said the stranger. "Natheless I'll tell you the tale. Yesterday I stood pledged to a maid, and thought soon to wed her. But she has been taken from me and is to become an old knight's bride this very day. And as for me, I care not what ending comes to my days, or how soon, without her." "Marry, come up," said Robin. "How got the old knight so sudden vantage?" "Look you, worship, 'tis this way. The Normans overrun us, and are in such great favor that none may say them nay. This old returned crusader coveted the land whereon my lady dwells. The estate is not large, but all in her own right, whereupon her brother says she shall wed a title, and he and the old knight have fixed it up for to-day." "Nay, but surely—" began Robin. "Hear me out, worship," said the other. "Belike you think me a sorry dog not to make fight of this, but the old knight, look you, is not come atable. I threw one of his varlets into a thorn hedge, and another into a water butt, and a third landed head first into a ditch, but I couldn't do any fighting at all." "'Tis a pity," quoth Little John gravely. He had been sitting cross-legged listening to this tale of woe. "What think you, Friar Tuck? Doth not a bit of fighting ease a man's mind?" "Bloodletting is oft times recommended of the leeches," replied Tuck. "Does the maid love you?" asked Robin Hood. "By our troth, she loved me right well," said the minstrel. "I have a little ring of hers by me which I have kept for 7 long years." "What is your name?" then said Robin Hood. "By the faith of my body," replied the young man, "my name is Allan a Dale." "What will you give me, Allan a Dale," said Robin Hood, "in ready gold or fee to help you to your true love again, and deliver her back unto you?" "I have no money, save only 5 shillings," quoth Allan. "But are you not Robin Hood?" Robin nodded. "Then you, if anyone, can aid me," said Allan a Dale eagerly, "and if you give me back my love, I swear upon the Book that I will be your true servant for ever after." "Where is this wedding to take place, and when?" asked Robin. "At Plympton Church, scarce 5 miles from here, at 3 o'clock of the afternoon." "Then to Plympton we will go," cried Robin suddenly springing into action, and he gave out orders like a general. "Will Stutely, do you have 24 good men over against Plympton Church against 3 o'clock of the afternoon. Much, good fellow, do you cook up some porridge for this youth, for he must have a good round stomach, aye, and a better gear. Will Scarlet, you will see to decking him out bravely for the nonce. And Friar Tuck, hold yourself in readiness, good book in hand, at the church. Mayhap you had best go ahead of us all." The fat Bishop of Hereford was full of pomp and importance that day at Plympton Church. He was to celebrate the marriage of an old knight, a returned crusader, and a landed young woman, and all the gentry thereabout were to grace the occasion with their presence. The church itself was gaily festooned with flowers for the ceremony, while out in the churchyard at one side brown ale flowed freely for all the servitors. Already were the guests beginning to assemble, when the Bishop, back in the vestry, saw a minstrel clad in green walk up boldly to the door and peer within. It was Robin Hood, who had borrowed Allan's beribboned harp for the time. "Now who are you, fellow?" quoth the Bishop, "and what do you here at the church door with your harp and saucy air?" "May it please your reverence," returned Robin, bowing very humbly, "I am but a strolling harper, yet likened the best in the whole north country, and I had hoped that my thrumming might add zest to the wedding to-day." "What tune can you harp?" demanded the Bishop. "I can harp a tune so merry that a forlorn lover will forget he is jilted," said Robin. "I can harp another tune that will make a bride forsake her lord at the altar. I can harp another tune that will bring loving souls together though they were up hill and down dale 5 good miles away from each other." "Then welcome, good minstrel," said the Bishop. "Music pleases me right well, and if you can play up to your prattle, 'twill indeed grace your ceremony. Let us have a sample of your wares." "Nay, I must not put finger to string until the bride and groom have come. Such a thing would ill fortune both us and them." "Have it as you will," said the Bishop, "but here comes the party now." Then up the lane to the church came the old knight, preceded by 10 archers liveried in scarlet and gold. A brave sight the archers made, but their master walked slowly, leaning upon a cane and shaking as though in a palsy. And after them came a sweet lass, leaning upon her brother's arm. Her hair did shine like glistening gold, and her eyes were like blue violets that peep out shyly at the sun. The color came and went in her cheeks like that tinting of a seashell, and her face was flushed as though she had been weeping. But now she walked with a proud air, as though she defied the world to crush her spirit. She had but 2 maids with her, finikin lasses, with black eyes and broad bosoms, who set off their lady's more delicate beauty well. One held up the bride's gown from the ground, the other carried flowers in plenty. "Now, by all the wedding bells that ever were rung," quoth Robin boldly, "this is the worst matched pair that ever mine eyes beheld." "Silence, miscreant," said a man who stood near. The Bishop had hurriedly donned his gown and now stood ready to meet the couple at the chancel. But Robin paid no heed to him. He let the knight and his 10 archers pass by, then he strode up to the bride and placed himself on the other side from her brother. "Courage, lady," he whispered, "there is another minstrel near, who mayhap play more to your liking." The lady glanced at him with a frightened air, but read such honesty and kindness in his glance that she brightened and gave him a grateful look. "Stand aside, fool!" cried the brother wrathfully. "Nay, but I am to bring good fortune to the bride by accompanying her through the church doors," said Robin, laughing. Thereupon he was allowed to walk by her side unmolested up to the chancel with the party. "Now strike up your music, fellow," ordered the Bishop. "Right gladly will I," quoth Robin, "and you will let me choose my instrument, for sometimes I like the harp, and other times I think the horn makes the merriest music in all the world." And he drew forth his bugle from underneath his green cloak, and blew three winding notes that made the church rafters ring again. "Seize him!" yelled the Bishop. "There's mischief afoot. These are the tricks of Robin Hood." The 10 liveried archers rushed forward from the rear of the church, where they had been stationed. But their rush was blocked by the onlookers, who now rose from their pews in alarm and crowded the aisles. Meanwhile Robin had leaped lightly over the chancel rail and stationed himself in a nook by the altar. "Stand where you are!" he shouted, drawing his bow. "The first man to pass the rail dies the death. And all ye who have come to witness a wedding, stay in your seats. We shall e'en have one, since we are come into the church. But the bride shall choose her own swain." Then up rose another great commotion at the door, and 24 good bowmen came marching in with Will Stuteley at their head, and they seized the 10 liveried archers and the bride's scowling brother and the other men on guard and bound them prisoners. Then in came Allan a Dale, decked out gaily, with Will Scarlet for best man, and they walked gravely down the aisle and stood over against the chancel. "Before a maiden weds she chooses, and the laws of good King Harry be just ones," said Robin. "Now, maiden, before this wedding continues, whom will you have to husband?" The maiden answered not in words, but smiled with a glad light in her eyes, and walked over to Allan and clasped her arms about his neck. "That is her true love," said Robin, "young Allan instead of the gouty knight. And the true lovers shall be married at this time before we depart away. Now, my Lord Bishop, proceed with the ceremony." "Nay, that shall not be," protested the Bishop. "The banes must be cried 3 times in the church. Such is the law of our land." "Come here, Little John," called Robin impatiently, and plucked off the Bishop's frock from his back and put it on the yeoman. Now the Bishop was short and fat, and Little John was long and lean. The gown hung loosely over Little John's shoulders and came only to his waist. He was a fine comical sight, and the people began to laugh consumedly at him. "By the faith of my body," said Robin, "this cloth makes you a man. You are the finest bishop that ever I saw in my life. Now cry the banes." So Little John clambered awkwardly into the choir, his short gown fluttering gaily, and he called the banes for the marriage of the Maid and Allan a Dale once, twice, and thrice. "That's not enough," said Robin. "Your gown is so short that you must talk longer." Then Little John asked them in the church 4, 5, 6, and 7 times. "Good enough," said Robin. "Now belike I see a worthy friar in the back of this church who can say a better service than ever my Lord Bishop of Hereford. My Lord Bishop shall be witness and seal the papers, but do you, good friar, bless this pair with book and candle." So Friar Tuck, who all along had been back in one corner of the church, came forward, and Allan and his maid kneeled before him, while the old knight, held an unwilling witness, gnashed his teeth in impotent rage, and the friar began with the ceremony. When he asked, "Who giveth this woman?" Robin stepped up and answered in a clear voice, "I do, I, Robin Hood of Barnesdale and Sherwood, and he who takes her from Allan a Dale shall buy her full dearly." So the twain were declared man and wife and duly blessed, and the bride was kissed by each sturdy yeoman, beginning with Robin Hood. Now I cannot end this jolly tale better than in the words of the ballad which came out of the happening, and which has been sung in the villages and countryside ever since. And thus having end of this merry wedding, the bride looked like a queen, and so they returned to the merry greenwood, amongst the leaves so green. So ends chapter 8. Chapter 9 of Robin Hood by J. Walker McSpadden. This recording is in the public domain. How the widow's 3 sons were rescued. Now Robin Hood is to Nottingham gone, with a link a down and a down, and there he met with the proud sheriff, was walking along the town. The wedding party was a merry one that left Plympton Church, I ween, but not so merry were the ones left behind. My Lord Bishop of Hereford was stuck up in the organ loft and left, gownless and fuming. The 10 liveried archers were variously disposed about the church to keep him company, 2 of them being locked in a tiny crypt, 3 in the belfry, to ring us a wedding peal, as Robin said, and the others under choir seats or in the vestry. The bride's brother at her entreaty was released, but bidden not to return to the church that day or interfere with his sister again on pain of death, while the rusty old knight was forced to climb a high tree, where he sat insecurely perched among the branches, feebly cursing the party as it departed. It was then approaching sundown, but none of the retainers or villagers dared rescue the imprisoned ones that night, for fear of Robin Hood's men. So it was not until sunup the next day that they were released. The bishop and the old knight, stiff as they were, did not delay longer than for breakfast, but so great was their rage and shame, made straight to Nottingham and levied the sheriff's forces. The sheriff himself was not anxious to try conclusions again with Robin in the open. Perhaps he had some slight scruples regarding his oath, but the others swore that they would go straight to the King if he did not help them, so he was fain to consent. A force of 100 picked men from the royal foresters and swordsmen of the shire was gathered together and marched straightway into the greenwood. There, as fortune would have it, they surprised some score of outlaws hunting, and instantly gave chase. But they could not surround the outlaws, who kept well in the lead, ever and anon dropping behind a log or boulder to speed back a shaft which meant mischief to the pursuers. One shaft indeed carried off the sheriff's hat and caused that worthy man to fall forward upon his horse's neck from sheer terror, while 5 other arrows landed in the fleshy parts of Forrester's arms. But the attacking party was not wholly unsuccessful. One outlaw in his flight stumbled and fell, when 2 others instantly stopped and helped to put him on his feet again. They were the widow's 3 sons, stout Will and Lester and John. The pause was an unlucky one for them, as a party of sheriff's men got above them and cut them off from their fellows. Swordsmen came up in the rear, and they were soon hemmed in on every side. But they gave good account of themselves, and before they had been overborne by force of numbers, they had killed 2 and disabled 3 more. The infuriated attackers were almost on the point of hewing the stout outlaws to pieces, when the sheriff cried, "Hold! Bind the villains! We will follow the law in this and take them to the town jail, but I promise ye, the biggest public hanging that has been seen in this shire for many changes of the moon." So they bound the widow's 3 sons and carried them back speedily to Nottingham. Now Robin had not chanced to be near the scene of the fight, or with his men, so for a time he heard nothing of the happening. But that evening, while returning to the camp, he was met by the widow herself, who came weeping along the way. "What news? What news, good woman?" said Robin hastily but courteously, for he liked her well. "God save ye, Master Robin," said the dame wildly. "God keep ye from the fate that has met my 3 sons. The sheriff has laid hands on them, and they are condemned to die." "Now, by Our Lady, that cuts me to the heart. Stout Will and Lester and merry John? The earliest friends I had in the band and still among the bravest. It must not be. When is this hanging set?" "Middle the Tinker tells me that it is for tomorrow noon," replied the dame. "By the truth o' my body," quoth Robin, "you could not tell me in better time. The memory of the old days when you freely bade me sup and dine would spur me on, even if 3 of the bravest lads in all the shire were not imperilled. Trust to me, good woman." The old widow threw herself on the ground and embraced his knees. "The dire danger I am asking ye to face," she said weeping, "and yet I knew your brave true heart would answer me. Heaven help ye, good Master Robin, to answer a poor widow's prayers." Then Robin Hood sped straightway to the forest camp, where he heard the details of the skirmish. How that his men had been outnumbered 5 to 1, but got off safely, as they thought, until a count of their members had shown the loss of the widow's 3 sons. "We must rescue them, my men," quoth Robin, "even from out the shadow of the rope itself." whereupon the band set to work to devise ways and means. Robin walked apart a little way with his head leaned thoughtfully upon his breast, for he was sore troubled. When whom should he meet but an old begging palmer, one of a devout order which made pilgrimages and wandered from place to place, supported by charity. This old fellow walked boldly up to Robin and asked alms of him, since Robin had been wont to aid members of his order. What news, this foolish old man?" said Robin. "What news, I do thee pray?" "3 squires in Nottingham town," quoth the palmer, "are condemned to die. Belike that is greater news than the shire has had in some Sundays." Then Robin's long-sought idea came to him like a flash. "Change thy apparel with me, old man," he said, "and I'll give thee 40 shillings in good silver to spend in beer or wine." "Oh, thine apparel is good," the palmer protested, "and mine is ragged and torn. The Holy Church teaches that thou shouldst ne'er laugh an old man to scorn." "I am in simple earnest, I say. Come, change thine apparel with mine. Here are 20 pieces of good broad gold to feast thy brethren right royally." So the palmer was persuaded, and Robin put on the old man's hat, which stood full high in the crown, and his cloak, patched with black and blue and red, like Joseph's coat of many colors in its old age, and his breeches, which had been sewed over with so many patterns that the original was scarce discernible, and his tattered hose, and his shoes, cobbled above and below. And while as he made the change in dress he made so many whimsical comments also about a man's pride and the dress that makes a man, that the palmer was like to choke with cackling laughter. I warrant you, the two were comical sights when they parted company that day. Natheless, Robin's own mother would not have known him, had she been living. The next morning the whole town of Nottingham was early astir, and as soon as the gates were open, country folk began to pour in, for a triple hanging was not held there every day in the week, and the bustle almost equaled a fair day. Robin Hood in his palmer's disguise was one of the first ones to enter the gates, and he strolled up and down and around the town as though he had never been there before in all his life. Presently he came to the market-place, and beheld thereon 3 gallows erected. "Who are these builded for, my son?" asked he of a rough soldier standing by. "For 3 of Robin Hood's men," answered the other. "And it were Robin himself, 'twould be thrice as high, I warrant ye. But Robin is too smart to get within the Sheriff's clutches again." The palmer crossed himself. "They say that he is a bold fellow," he whined. "Ha!" said the soldier. "He may be bold enough out behind stumps in the forest, but the open market-place is another matter." "Who is to hang these 3 poor wretches?" asked the palmer. "That hath the Sheriff not decided. But here he comes now to answer his own questions." And the soldier came to stiff attention as the Sheriff and his bodyguard stalked pompously up to inspect the gallows. "Oh, Heaven save you, worshipful Sheriff," said the palmer. "Heaven protect you. What will you give a silly old man today to be your hangman?" "Who are you, fellow?" asked the Sheriff sharply. "Naught save a poor old palmer. But I can shrive their souls and hang their bodies most devoutly." "Very good," replied the other. "The fee today is 13 pence, and I will add thereunto some suits of clothing for that ragged back of yours." "God bless ye," said the palmer, and he went with the soldier to the jail to prepare his 3 men for execution. Just before the stroke of noon the doors of the prison opened, and the procession of the condemned came forth. Down through the long lines of packed people they walked to the market-place, the palmer in the lead, and the widow's 3 sons marching firmly erect between soldiers. At the gallows foot they halted. The palmer whispered to them, as though offering last words of consolation, and the 3 men, with arms bound tightly behind their backs, ascended the scaffold, followed by their confessor. Then Robin stepped to the edge of the scaffold, while the people grew still as death, for they desired to hear the last words uttered to the victims. But Robin's voice did not quaver forth, weakly, as formerly, and his figure had stiffened bolt upright beneath the black robe that covered his rags. "Hark ye, proud Sheriff," he cried, "I was never a hangman in all my life, nor do I now intend to begin that trade. Accursed be he who first set the fashion of hanging. I have but 3 more words to say. Listen to them." And forth from the robe he drew his horn and blew 3 loud blasts thereon. Then his keen hunting knife flew forth, and in a trice stout Will, Lester, and Merry John were free men and had sprung forward and seized the halberds from the nearest soldiers guarding the gallows. "Seize them! 'Tis Robin Hood!" screamed the Sheriff. "An 100 pounds if ye hold them, dead or alive." "I make it 200," roared the fat Bishop. But their voices were drowned in the uproar that ensued immediately after Robin blew his horn. He himself had drawn his sword and leaped down the stairs from the scaffold, followed by his 3 men. The guard had closed around them in vain effort to disarm them, when "A rescuer!" shouted Will Stuteley's clear voice on one side of them, and "A rescue!" bellowed Little John's on the other, and down through the terror-stricken crowd rushed 80 men in Lincoln green, their force seeming twice that number in the confusion. With swords drawn they fell upon the guard from every side at once. There was a brief clash of hot weapons, then the guard scattered wildly, and Robin Hood's men formed in a compact mass around their leader and forced their way slowly down the market-place. "Seize them, in the King's name!" shrieked the Sheriff. "Close the gates!" In truth, the peril would have been even greater, had this last order been carried out. But Will Scarlet and Allen a Dale had foreseen that event and had already overpowered the 2 warders. So the gates stood wide open, and toward them the band of outlaws headed. The soldiers rallied a force of twice their number and tried resolutely to pierce their center. But the retreating force turned thrice and sent such volleys of keen arrows from their good yew bows that they kept a distance between the 2 forces. And thus the gate was reached, and the long road leading up the hill, and at last the protecting green wood itself. The soldiers dared come no farther, and the widow's 3 sons, I warrant you, supped more heartily that night than ever before in their whole lives. So ends Chapter 9. Chapter 10 of Robin Hood by J. Walker McSpadden. This recording is in the public domain. How a beggar filled the public eye. Good Robin accosted him in his way, to see what he might be. If any beggar had money, he thought some part had he. One bright morning, soon after the stirring events told in the last chapter, Robin wandered forth alone down the road to Barnesdale, to see if aught had come of the Sheriff's pursuit. But all was still and serene and peaceful. No one was in sight save a solitary beggar who came sturdily along his way in Robin's direction. The beggar caught sight of Robin at the same moment as he emerged from the trees, but gave no sign of having seen him. He neither slackened nor quickened his pace, but jogged forward merrily, whistling as he came and beating time by punching holes in the dusty road with a stout pike staff in his hand. The curious look of the fellow arrested Robin's attention, and he decided to stop and talk with him. The fellow was bare-legged and bare-armed, and wore a long shift of a shirt, fastened with a belt. About his neck hung a stout, bulging bag, which was buckled by a good piece of leather thong. He had 3 hats upon his head, together sticked fast. He cared neither for the wind nor wet, in lands where'er he passed. The fellow looked so fat and hearty, and the wallet on his shoulder seemed so well filled, that Robin thought within himself, "Ha! This is a lucky beggar for me. If any of them have money, this is the chap, and marry, he should share it with us poorer bodies." So he flourished his own stick and planted himself in the traveller's path. "Sirrah, fellow," quoth he, "whither away so fast? Tarry, for I would have speech with ye." The beggar made as though he heard him not, and kept straight on with his faring. "Tarry, I say, fellow," said Robin again, "for there's a way to make folks obey." "Nay, 'tis not so," answered the beggar, speaking for the first time. "I obey no man in all England, not even the King himself. So let me pass on my way, for 'tis growing late, and I have still far to go before I can care for my stomach's good." "Now, by my troth," said Robin, once more getting in front of the other, "I see well by your fat countenance that you lack not for good food, while I go hungry. Therefore you must lend me of your means till we meet again, so that I may hie to the nearest tavern." "I have no money to lend," said the beggar crossly. Methinks you are as young a man as I, and as well able to earn a supper. So go your way, and I'll go mine. If you fast till you get aught out of me, you'll go hungry for the next 12 month." "Not while I have a stout stick to thwack your saucy bones," cried Robin. "Stand and deliver, I say, or I'll dust your shirt for you. And if that will not teach you manners, then we'll see what a broad arrow can do with a beggar's skin." The beggar smiled and answered boast with boast. "Come on with your staff, fellow. I care no more for it than a pudding stick. As for your pretty bow, that for it." And with amazing quickness he swung his pike staff around and knocked Robin's bow clean out of his hand, so that his fingers smarted with pain. Robin danced and tried to bring his own staff into action, but the beggar never gave him a chance. Biff! Whack! came the pike staff, smiting him soundly and beating down his guard. There were but two things to do: either stand there and take a sound drubbing, or beat a hasty retreat. Robin chose the latter, as you or I would probably have done, and scurried back into the wood, blowing his horn as he went. "Fie, for shame, man!" jeered the bold beggar after him. "What is your haste? We had but just begun. Stay and take your money, else you will never be able to pay your reckoning at the tavern." But Robin answered him never a word. He fled up hill and down dale till he met three of his men who were running up in answer to his summons. "What is wrong?" they asked. "'Tis a saucy beggar," said Robin, clutching his breath. "He is back there on the high road with the hardest stick I've met in a good many days. He gave me no chance to reason with him, the dirty scamp." The men, Much and two of the widow's sons, could scarce conceal their mirth at the thought of Robin Hood running from a beggar. Natheless they kept grave faces and asked their leader if he was hurt. "Nay," he replied, "but I shall speedily feel better if you will fetch me that same beggar and let me have a fair chance at him." So the three yeomen made haste and came out upon the highroad and followed after the beggar, who was going smoothly along his way again, as though he were at peace with all the world. "The easiest way to settle this beggar," said Much, "is to surprise him. Let us cut through yon neck of woods and come upon him before he is aware." The others agreed to this, and the three were soon close upon their prey. "Now," quoth Much, and the other two sprang quickly upon the beggar's back and wrested his pike-staff from his hand. At the same moment Much drew his dagger and flashed it before the fellow's breast. "Yield you, my man," cried he, "for a friend of ours awaits you in the wood, to teach you how to fight properly." "Give me a fair chance," said the beggar valiantly, "and I'll fight you all at once." But they would not listen to him. Instead they turned him about and began to march him toward the forest. Seeing that it was useless to struggle, the beggar began to parley. "Good my masters," quoth he, "why use this violence? I will go with ye safe and quietly, if ye insist, but if ye will set me free I'll make it worth your while. I've £100 in my bag here. Let me go my way, and ye shall have all that's in the bag." The three outlaws took counsel together at this. "What say you?" asked Much of the others. "Our master will be more glad to see this beggar's wallet than his sorry face." The other two agreed, and the little party came to a halt and loosed hold of the beggar. "Count out your gold speedily, friend," said Much. There was a brisk wind blowing, and the beggar turned about to face it, directly they had unhanded him. "It shall be done, gossips," said he. "One of you lend me your cloak, and we will spread it upon the ground and put the wealth upon it." The cloak was handed him, and he placed his wallet upon it as though it were very heavy indeed. Then he crouched down and fumbled with the leather fastenings. The outlaws also bent over and watched the proceeding closely, lest he should hide some of the money on his person. Presently he got the bag unfastened and plunged his hands into it. Forth from it he drew, not shilling gold, but handfuls of fine meal which he dashed into the eager faces of the men around him. The wind aided him in this, and soon there arose a blinding cloud which filled the eyes, noses, and mouths of the three outlaws till they could scarcely see or breathe. While they gasped and choked and sputtered and felt around wildly for that rogue of a beggar, he finished the job by picking up the cloak by its corners and shaking it vigorously in the faces of his suffering victims. Then he seized a stick which lay conveniently near, and began to rain blows down upon their heads, shoulders, and sides, all the time dancing first on one leg, then on the other, and crying, "Villains! Rascals! Here are the £100 I promised. How do you like them? Aye, faith, you'll get all that's in the bag." Whack, 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 whack went the stick, emphasizing each word. Howls of pain might have gone up from the sufferers, but they had too much meal in their throats for that. Their one thought was to flee, and they stumbled off blindly down the road, the beggar following them a little way to give them a few parting love taps. "Fare ye well, my masters," he said finally, turning the other way, "and when next I come along the Barnesdale road, I hope you will be able to tell gold from meal dust." With this he departed, an easy victor, and again went whistling on his way, while the three outlaws rubbed the meal out of their eyes and began to catch their breath again. As soon as they could look around them clearly, they beheld Robin Hood leaning against a tree trunk and surveying them smilingly. He had recovered his own spirits in full measure on seeing their plight. "God save ye, gossips," he said. "Ye must, in sooth, have gone the wrong way and been to the mill, from the looks of your clothes." Then when they looked shamefaced and answered never a word, he went on in a soft voice, "Did ye see aught of that bold beggar I sent you for, lately?" "In sooth, master," responded Much, the miller's son, "we heard more of him than we saw him. He filled us so full of meal that I shall sweat meal for a week. I was born in a mill, and had the smell of meal in my nostrils from my very birth, you might say, and yet never before did I see such a quantity of the stuff in so small space." And he sneezed violently. "How was that?" asked Robin demurely. "Why, we laid hold of the beggar as you did order, when he offered to pay for his release out of the bag he carried upon his back." "The same I coveted," quoth Robin as if to himself. "So we agreed to this," went on Much, and spread a cloak down, and he opened his bag and shook it thereon. Instantly a great cloud of meal filled the air, whereby we could neither see nor breathe, and in the midst of this cloud he vanished like a wizard. "But not before he left certain black and blue spots to be remembered by, I see," commented Robin. "He was in league with the evil one," said one of the widow's sons, rubbing himself ruefully. Then Robin laughed outright, and sat him down upon the gnarled root of a tree to finish his merriment. "Four bold outlaws put to rout by a sorry beggar," cried he. "I can laugh at ye, my men, for I am in the same boat with ye. But 'twould never do to have this tale get abroad, even in the greenwood, how that we could not hold our own with the odds in our favor. So let us have this little laugh all to ourselves, and no one else need be the wiser." The others saw the point of this, and felt better directly, despite their itching desire to get hold of the beggar again, and none of the four ever told of the adventure. But the beggar must have boasted of it at the next tavern, or a little bird, perched among the branches of a neighboring oak, must have sung of it, for it got abroad, as such tales will, and was put into a right droll ballad, which, I warrant you, the four outlaws did not like to hear. So ends Chapter 10. Chapter 11 of Robin Hood by J. Walker McSpadden. This recording is in the public domain. How Robin Hood fought Guy of Gisborne. "I dwell by dale and down," quoth he, "and Robin to take I'm sworn, and when I am called by my right name, I am Guy of good Gisborne." Some weeks passed after the rescue of the widow's three sons, weeks spent by the Sheriff in the vain effort to entrap Robin Hood and his men. For Robin's name and deeds had come to the King's ears in London town, and he sent word to the Sheriff to capture the outlaw under penalty of losing his office. So the Sheriff tried every manner of means to surprise Robin Hood in the forest, but always without success, and he increased the price put upon Robin's head, in the hope that the best men in the kingdom could be induced to try their skill at a capture. Now there was a certain Guy of Gisborne, a hireling knight of the King's army, who heard of Robin and of the price upon his head. Sir Guy was one of the best men at the bow and the sword in all the King's service. But his heart was black and treacherous. He obtained the King's leave forthwith to seek out the forester, and armed with the King's scroll he came before the Sheriff at Nottingham. "I have come to capture Robin Hood," quoth he, "and mean to have him, dead or alive." "Right gladly would I aid you," answered the Sheriff, even if the King's seal were not sufficient warrant. How many men need you?" "None," replied Sir Guy, "for I am convinced that forces of men can never come at the bold robber. I must needs go alone. But do you hold your men in readiness at Barnesdale, and when you hear a blast from this silver bugle, come quickly, for I shall have the sly Robin within my clutches." "Very good," said the Sheriff. "Marry, it shall be done." And he set about giving orders, while Guy of Gisborne sallied forth disguised. Now, as luck would have it, Will Scarlet and Little John had gone to Barnesdale that very day to buy suits of Lincoln green for certain of the yeomen who had come out at the knees and elbows. But not deeming it best for both of them to run their necks into a noose together, they parted just outside the town, and Will went within the gates, while John tarried and watched at the brow of the hill on the outside. Presently whom should he see but this same Will flying madly forth from the gates again, closely pursued by the Sheriff and 60 men. Over the moat Will sprang, through the bushes and briars, across the swamp, over stocks and stones, up the woodland roads in long leaps like a scared jackrabbit. And after him puffed the Sheriff and his men, their force scattering out in the flight as one man would tumble head first into a ditch, another mire up in the swamp, another trip over a rolling stone, and still others sit down on the roadside and gasp for wind like fish out of water. Little John could not forbear laughing heartily at the scene, though he knew that 'twould be anything but a laughing matter if Will should stumble. And in truth, one man was like to come upon him. It was William Atrent, the best runner among the Sheriff's men. He had come within 20 feet of Scarlet and was leaping upon him with long bounds like a greyhound, when John rose up quickly, drew his bow, and let fly one of his fatal shafts. It would have been better for William Atrent to have been abed with sorrow, says the ballad, than to be that day in the greenwood Slade to meet with Little John's arrow. He had run his last race. The others halted a moment in consternation, when the shaft came hurtling down from the hill, but looking up they beheld none save Little John, and with a cry of fierce joy they turned upon him. Meanwhile Will Scarlet had reached the brow of the hill and sped down the other side. "I'll just send one more little message of regret to the Sheriff," said Little John, "before I join Will." But this foolhardy deed was his undoing, for just as the arrow left the string, a good yew bow that had never before failed him snapped in twain. Woe worth thee, wicked wood, that ere thou grew on a tree," cursed Little John, and planted his feet resolutely in the earth, resolved to sell the path dearly, for the soldiers were now so close upon him that he dared not turn. And a good right account of himself he gave that day, dealing with each man as he came up according to his merit. And so winded were the pursuers when they reached the top of the hill that he laid out the first 10 of them right and left with huge blows of his brawny fist. But if 5 men could do no more than 3, a score can overcome 1. A body of archers stood off at a prudent distance and covered Little John with their arrows. "Now yield you," panted the Sheriff. "Yield you, Little John, or Reynold Greenleaf, or whatever else name you carry this day. Yield you, or some few of these shafts will reach your heart." "Marry, my heart has been touched by your words ere now," said Little John, "and I yield me." So the Sheriff's men laid hold of Little John and bound him fast with many cords. So fearful were they lest he should escape. And the Sheriff laughed aloud in glee, and thought of how he should avenge his stolen plate, and determined to make a good day's work of it. "By the saints," he said, "you shall be drawn by dale and down and hanged high on a hill in Barnesdale this very day." "Hang and be hanged," retorted the prisoner. "You may fail of your purpose if it be Heaven's will." Back down the hill and across the moor went the company speedily, for they feared a rescue, and as they went the stragglers joined them. Here a man got up feebly out of the ditch and rubbed his pate and fell in like a chicken with the pip going for its dinner. Yonder came hobbling a man with a lame ankle, or another with his shins torn by the briars, or another with his jacket all muddy from the marsh. So in truth it was a tatterdemalion crew that limped and straggled and wandered back into Barnesdale that day. Yet all were merry, for the Sheriff had promised them flagons of wine, and moreover they were to hang speedily the boldest outlaw in England next to Robin Hood himself. The gallows was quickly put up and a new rope provided. "Now up with you," commanded the Sheriff, "and let us see if your greenwood tricks will avail you tomorrow." "I would that I had bold Robin's horn," muttered poor John. "Methinks 'tis all up with me even as the Sheriff hath spoken." In good sooth the time was dire and pressing. The rope was placed around the prisoner's neck, and the men prepared to haul away. "Are you ready?" called the Sheriff. One, two, but before the three left his lips the faint sound of a silver bugle came floating over the hill. "By my troth, that is Sir Guy of Gisborne's horn," quoth the Sheriff, "and he bade me not to delay answering its summons. He has caught Robin Hood." "Pardon, Excellency," said one of his men, "but if he has caught Robin Hood, this is a merry day indeed, and let us save this fellow and build another gallows and hang them both together." "That's a brave thought," said the Sheriff, slapping his knee. "Take the rascal down and bind him fast to the gallows tree against our return." So Little John was made fast to the gallows tree, while the Sheriff and all his men who could march or hobble went out to get Robin Hood and bring him in for the double hanging. Let us leave talking of Little John and the Sheriff and see what has become of Robin Hood. In the first place, he and Little John had come near having a quarrel that self-same morning because both had seen a curious-looking yeoman, and each wanted to challenge him singly. But Robin would not give way to his lieutenant, and that is why John, in a huff, had gone with Will to Barnesdale. Meanwhile Robin approached the curious-looking stranger. He seemed to be a three-legged creature at first sight, but on coming nearer you would have seen that 'twas really naught but a poorly clad man, who for a freak had covered up his rags with a capel hide, nothing more nor less than the sun-dried skin of a horse, complete with head, tail, and mane. The skin of the head made a helmet, while the tail gave the curious three-legged appearance. "Good morrow, good fellow," said Robin cheerily. "Methinks by the bow you bear in your hand that you should be a good archer." "Indifferent good," said the other, returning his greeting. "But 'tis not of archery that I am thinking this morning, for I have lost my way and would fain find it again." "By my faith, I could have believed 'twas your wits you'd lost," thought Robin, smiling. Then aloud, "I'll lead you through the wood," quoth he, "and you will tell me your business, for belike your speech is much gentler than your attire." "Who are you to ask me my business?" asked the other roughly. "I am one of the King's Rangers," replied Robin, "set here to guard his deer against curious-looking strollers." "Curious-looking I may be," returned the other, "but no stroller. Hark ye, since you are a ranger, I must e'en demand your service. I am on the King's business and seek an outlaw. Men call him Robin Hood. Are you one of his men?" eyeing him keenly. "Nay, God forbid," said Robin. "But what want you with him?" "That is another tale. But I'd rather meet with that proud outlaw than 40 good pounds of the King's money." Robin now saw how the land lay. "Come with me, good yeoman," said he, "and belike, a little later in the day, I can show you Robin's haunts when he is at home. Meanwhile let us have some pastime under the greenwood tree. Let us first try the mastery at shooting arrows." The other agreed, and they cut down 2 willow wands of a summer's growth that grew beneath a briar, and set them up at a distance of 60 yards. "Lead on, good fellow," quoth Robin. "The first shot to you." "Nay, by my faith," said the other, "I will follow your lead." So Robin stepped forth and bent his bow carelessly and sent his shaft whizzing toward the wand, missing it by a scant inch. He of the horsehide followed with more care, yet was a good 3 fingers' breadth away. On the second round the stranger led off and landed cleverly within the small garland at the top of the wand, but Robin shot far better and clave the wand itself clean at the middle. "A blessing on your heart," shouted Capelhide. "Never saw I such shooting as that. Belike you are better than Robin Hood himself, but you have not yet told me your name." "Nay, by my faith," quoth Robin, "I must keep it secret till you have told me your own." "I do not disdain to tell it," said the other. "I dwell by dale and down, and to take bold Robin am I sworn. This would I tell him to his face, were he not so great a craven. When I am called by my right name, I am Guy of Gisborne." This he said with a great show of pride, and he strutted back and forth, forgetful that he had just been beaten at archery. Robin eyed him quietly. "Methinks I have heard of you elsewhere. Do you not bring men to the gallows for a living?" "Aye, but only outlaws such as Robin Hood." "But pray what harm has Robin Hood done you?" "He is a highway robber," said Sir Guy, evading the question. "Has he ever taken from the rich that he did not give again to the poor? Does he not protect the women and children and side with weak and helpless? Is not his greatest crime the shooting of a few king's deer?" "Have done with your sophistry," said Sir Guy impatiently. "I am more than ever of opinion that you are one of Robin's men yourself." "I have told you I am not," quoth Robin briefly. "But if I am to help you catch him, what is your plan?" "Do you see this silver bugle?" said the other. "A long blast upon it will summon the sheriff and all his men, when once I have Robin within my grasp. And if you show him to me, I'll give you the half of my 40 pounds reward." "I would not help hang a man for 10 times 40 pounds," said the outlaw. "Yet will I point out Robin to you for the reward I find at my sword's point. I myself am Robin Hood of Sherwood and Barnesdale." "Then have at you!" cried the other, springing swiftly into action. His sword leaped forth from beneath the horse's hide with the speed born of long practice, and before Robin had come to guard, the other had smitten at him full and foul. Robin eluded the lunge and drew his own weapon. "A scurvy trick," quoth he grimly, "to strike at a man unprepared." Then neither spoke more, but fell sternly to work. Lunge and thrust and ward and parry. For 2 full hours the weapons smote together sullenly, and neither Robin Hood nor Sir Guy would yield an inch. I promise you that if you could have looked forth on the fight from behind the trunk of some friendly tree, you would have seen deadly sport such as few men beheld in Sherwood Forest. For the fighters glared sullenly at each other, the fires of hatred burning in their eyes. One was fighting for his life, the other for a reward and the King's favor. Still circled the bright blades swiftly in the air, now gleaming in the peaceful sunlight, again hissing like maddened serpents. Neither had yet touched the other until Robin, in an unlucky moment, stumbled over the projecting root of a tree, when Sir Guy, instead of giving him the chance to recover himself as any courteous knight would have done, struck quickly at the falling man and wounded him in the left side. "Ah, dear Lady in heaven," gasped Robin, uttering his favorite prayer, "shield me now. 'Twas never a man's destiny to die before his day." And adroitly he sprang up again, and came straight at the other with an awkward but unexpected stroke. The knight had raised his weapon high to give a final blow, when Robin reached beneath and across his guard. One swift lunge, and Sir Guy of Gisborne staggered backward with a deep groan, Robin's sword through his throat. Robin looked at the slain man regretfully. "You did bring it upon yourself," said he, "and traitor and hireling though you were, I would not willingly have killed you." He looked to his own wound. It was not serious, and he soon staunched the blood and bound up the cut. Then he dragged the dead body into the bushes and took off the horse's hide and put it upon himself. He placed his own cloak upon Sir Guy and marked his face so none might tell who had been slain. Robin's own figure and face were not unlike the other's. Pulling the capul hide well over himself, so that the helmet hid most of his face, Robin seized the silver bugle and blew a long blast. It was the blast that saved the life of Little John over in Barnesdale, for you and I have already seen how it caused the fond sheriff to prick up his ears and stay the hanging, and go scurrying up over the hill and into the wood with his men in search of another victim. In 25 minutes up came running a score of the sheriff's best archers. "Did you signal us, lording?" they asked, approaching Robin. "Aye," said he, going to meet the puffing sheriff. What news, Sir Guy?" said the officer. "Robin Hood and Guy of Gisborne had a fight, and he that wears Robin's cloak lies under the covert yonder." "The best news I have heard in all my life," exclaimed the sheriff, rubbing his hands. "I would that we could have saved him for the hanging, though I cannot now complain." "The hanging?" repeated Robin. "Yes, this is our lucky day on the calendar. After you left me, we narrowly missed running one of the fellows, I believe 'twas Will Scarlet, to earth, and another who came to his relief we were just about to hang, when your horn blew." "Who was the other?" asked the disguised outlaw. "Whom do you suppose?" laughed the sheriff. "The best man in the greenwood, next to Robin Hood himself, Little John, Reinhold Greenleaf." For the sheriff could not forget the name Little John had borne under his roof at Nottingham. "Little John!" thought Robin with a start. Verily, that was a lucky blast of the bugle. "But I see you have not escaped without a scratch," continued the sheriff, becoming talkative through pure glee. "Here, one of you men, give Sir Guy of Gisborne your horse, while others of you bury that dog of an outlaw where he lies. And let us hasten back to Barnesdale and finish hanging the other." So they put spurs to their horses, and as they rode Robin forced himself to talk merrily, while all the time he was planning the best way to succor Little John. "A boon, Sheriff," he said as they reached the gates of the town. "What is it, worthy sir? You have but to speak." "I do not want any of your gold, for I have had a brave fight. But now that I have slain the master, let me put an end to the man, so it shall be said that Guy of Gisborne dispatched the two greatest outlaws of England in one day." "Have it as you will," said the sheriff. "But you should have asked a knight's fee and double your reward, and it would have been yours. It isn't every man that can take Robin Hood." "No, Excellency," answered Robin. "I say it without boasting, that no man took Robin Hood yesterday, and none shall take him tomorrow." Then he approached Little John, who was still tied to the gallows tree, and he said to the sheriff's men, "Now stand you back here till I see if the prisoner has been shrived." And he stooped swiftly and cut Little John's bonds, and thrust into his hands Sir Guy's bow and arrows, which he had been careful to take. "'Tis I, Robin," he whispered. But in truth Little John knew it already, and had decided there was to be no hanging that day. Then Robin blew 3 loud blasts upon his own horn, and drew forth his own bow, and before the astonished sheriff and his men could come to arms the arrows were whistling in their midst in no uncertain fashion. And look, through the gates and over the walls came pouring another flight of arrows. Will Scarlet and Will Stuteley had watched and planned a rescue ever since the sheriff and Robin rode back down the hill. Now in good time they came, and the sheriff's demoralized force turned tail and ran, while Robin and Little John stood under the harmless gallows, and sped swift arrows after them, and laughed to see them go. Then they joined their comrades and hasted back to the good greenwood, and there rested. They had got enough sport for one day. So ends Chapter 11. Chapter 12 of Robin Hood by J. Walker McSpadden. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. How Maid Marian came back to Sherwood Forest. Also, how Robin Hood came before Queen Eleanor. But Robin Hood he himself had disguised, and Marian was strangely attired, that they proved foes and so fell to blows, whose valor bold Robin admired. And when he came at London's court, he fell down on his knee. "Thou art welcome, Locksley," said the Queen, "and all thy good yeomanry." Now it fell out that one day not long thereafter, Robin was minded to try his skill at hunting, and not knowing whom he might meet in his rambles, he stained his face and put on a sorry-looking jacket and a long cloak before he sallied forth. As he walked, the peacefulness of the morning came upon him, and brought back to his memory the early days so long ago, when he had roamed these same glades with Marian. How sweet they seemed to him now, and how far away. Marian, too, the dainty friend of his youth, would he ever see her again? He had thought of her very often of late, and each time with increasing desire to hear her clear voice and musical laugh, and see her eyes light up at his coming. Perhaps the happiness of Allan a Dale and his lady had caused Robin's heartstrings to vibrate more strongly. Perhaps, too, the coming of Will Scarlet. But certes, Robin was anything but a hunter this bright morning as he walked along with head drooping in a most lovelorn way. Presently a hart entered the glade in full view of him, gazing peacefully, and instantly the man of action awoke. His bow was drawn, and a shaft all but loosed, when the beast fell suddenly, pierced by a clever arrow from the far side of the glade. Then a handsome little page sprang gleefully from the covert and ran toward the dying animal. This was plainly the archer, for he flourished his bow aloft, and likewise bore a sword at his side, though for all that he looked a mere lad. Robin approached the hart from the other side. "How dare you shoot the King's beasts, stripling?" he asked severely. "I have as much right to shoot them as the King himself," answered the page haughtily. "How dare you question me?" The voice stirred Robin strongly. It seemed to chime into his memories of the old days. He looked at the page sharply, and the other returned the glance, straight and unafraid. "Who are you, my lad?" Robin said more civilly. "No lad of yours, and my name's my own," retorted the other with spirit. "Softly, fair and softly, sweet page, or we of the forest will have to teach you manners," said Robin. "Not if you stand for the forest," cried the page, whipping out his sword. "Come, draw and defend yourself." He swung his blade valiantly, and Robin saw nothing for it but to draw likewise. The page thereupon engaged him quite fiercely, and Robin found that he had many pretty little tricks at fencing. Natheless, Robin contented himself with parrying, and was loath to exert all his superior strength upon the lad. So the fight lasted for above a quarter of an hour, at the end of which time the page was almost spent, and the hot blood flushed his cheeks in a most charming manner. The outlaw saw his distress, and to end the fight allowed himself to be pricked slightly on the wrist. "Are you satisfied, fellow?" asked the page, wincing a little at sight of the blood. "Aye, honestly," replied Robin, "and now perhaps you will grant me the honor of knowing to whom I owe this scratch." "I am Richard Partington, page to Her Majesty Queen Eleanor," answered the lad with dignity, and again the sound of his voice troubled Robin sorely. "Why come you to the greenwood alone, Master Partington?" The lad considered his answer while wiping his sword with a small lace kerchief. The action brought a dim, confused memory to Robin. The lad finally looked him again in the eye. "Forester, whether or no you be a king's man, know that I seek one Robin Hood, an outlaw, to whom I bring amnesty from the Queen. Can you tell me aught of him?" And while awaiting his answer he replaced the kerchief in his shirt. As he did so, the gleam of a golden trophy caught the outlaw's eye. Robin started forward with a joyful cry. "Aye, I know you now, by the sight of yon golden arrow won at the Sheriff's tourney. You are she on whom I bestowed it, and none other than Maid Marian." "You are—" gasped Marian, for it was she. "Not Robin?" "Robin's self," said he gaily, and forthwith, clad as he was in rags, and stained of face, he clasped the dainty page close to his breast. And she forsooth yielded right willingly. "But, Robin," she exclaimed presently, "I knew you not, and was rude, and wounded you." "'Twas nothing," he replied laughingly, "so long as it brought me you." But she made more ado over the sore wrist than Robin had received for all his former hurts put together. And she bound it with the little kerchief, and said, "Now 'twill get well." And Robin was convinced she spoke the truth, for he never felt better in all his life. The whole woods seemed tinged with a roseate hue since Marian had come again. But she, while happy also, was ill at ease, and Robin, with a man's slow discernment, at last saw that it was because of her boy's attire. He thought bluntly that there was naught to be ashamed of, but smilingly handed her his tattered long cloak, which she blushingly put on, and forthwith recovered her spirits directly. Then they began to talk of each other's varied fortunes, and of the many things which had parted them. And so much did they find to tell that the sun had begun to decline well into the afternoon before they realized how the hours sped. "But I am a sorry host," exclaimed Robin, springing to his feet. "I have not once invited you to my wild roof." "And I am but a sorry page," replied Marian, "for I had clean forgot that I was Richard Partington, and really did bring you a message from Queen Eleanor. Tell me on our way home, and there you shall be entrusted to Mistress Dale, while the first of my men we meet will I send back for your deer." So she told him, as they walked back through the glade, how that the fame of his prowess had reached Queen Eleanor's ears in London town, and the Queen had said, "Fain would I see this bold yeoman, and behold his skill at the longbow." And the Queen had promised him amnesty if he and 4 of his archers would repair to London against the next tournament the week following, there to shoot against King Henry's picked men, of whom the King was right vain. All this Marian told in detail, and added, "When I heard Her Majesty say she desired to see you, I asked leave to go in search of you, saying I had known you once. And the Queen was right glad, and bade me go, and sent this gold ring to you from off her finger, in token of her faith." Then Robin took the ring, and bowed his head, and kissed it loyally. "By this token will I go to London town," quoth he, "and ere I part with the Queen's pledge, may the hand that bears it be stricken off at the wrist." By this time they were come to the grove before the cave, and Robin presented Maid Marian to the band, who treated her with the greatest respect. Will Scarlet was especially delighted to greet again his old-time friend, while Allan a Dale and his good wife bustled about to make her welcome in their tiny thatched cottage. That evening, after they had supped royally upon the very hearth that Marian had slain, Allan sang sweet songs of northern minstrelsy to the fair guest as she sat by Robin's side, the golden arrow gleaming in her dark hair. The others all joined in the chorus, from Will Scarlet's baritone to Friar Tuck's heavy bass. Even Little John essayed to sing, although looked at threateningly by Much the miller's son. Then Robin bade Marian repeat her message from the Queen, which Marian did in a way befitting the dignity of her royal mistress. After which the yeomen gave 3 cheers for the Queen and 3 more for her page, and drank toast to them both, rising to their feet. "Ye have heard," quoth Robin, standing forth, "how that Her Majesty, whom God preserve, wishes but 4 men to go with me. Wherefore I choose Little John and Will Stuteley, my 2 lieutenants, Will Scarlet, my cousin, and Allan a Dale, my minstrel. Mistress Dale also can go with her husband and be company for the Queen's page. We will depart with early morning, decked in our finest. So stir ye, my lads, and see that not only your tunics are fresh, but your swords bright and your bows and arrows fit, for we must be a credit to the Queen as well as the good greenwood. You, Much, and stout Will, Lester, and John, the widow's 3 sons, shall have command of the band while we are away, and Friar Tuck shall preside over the needs of your souls and stomachs." The orders were received with shouts of approval, and toasts all around were drunk again in nut brown ale, ere the company dispersed to rest after making ready for the journey. The next morning was as fine a summer's day as ever you want to see, and the green leaves of the forest made a pleasing background for the gay picture of the yeomen setting forth. Says the old ballad, "It was a seemly sight to see how Robin Hood himself had dressed, and all his yeomanry. He clothed his men in Lincoln green, and himself in scarlet red, with hats of black and feathers white to bravely deck each head. Nor were the 2 ladies behindhand, I ween, at the bedecking." Thus the chosen party of 7 sallied forth, being accompanied to the edge of the wood by the whole band, who gave them a merry parting and God-speed. The journey to London town was made without incident. The party proceeded boldly along the King's highroad, and no man met them who was disposed to say them nay. Besides, the good Queen's warrant and ring would have answered for them, as indeed it did at the gates of London. So on they sped, and in due course came to the palace itself and awaited audience with the Queen. Now the King had gone that day to Finsbury Field, where the tourney was soon to be held, in order to look over the lists and see some of his picked men, whom he expected to win against all comers. So much had he boasted of these men that the Queen had secretly resolved to win a wager of him. She had heard of the fame of Robin Hood and his yeomen, as Marian had said, and Marian on her part had been overjoyed to be able to add a word in their favor and to set out in search of them. Today the Queen sat in her private audience room chatting pleasantly with her ladies, when in came Mistress Marian Fitzwalter, attired again as befitted her rank of lady in waiting. She curtsied low to the Queen and awaited permission to speak. "How now," said the Queen, smiling, "is this my Lady Marian, or the page Richard Partington?" "Both, an it please your Majesty. Richard found the man you sought, while Marian brought him to you." "Where is he?" asked Queen Eleanor eagerly. "Awaiting your audience, he and 4 of his men. Likewise a lady of whose wooing and wedding I can tell you a pretty story at another time." "Have them admitted." So Marian gave orders to a herald, and presently Robin Hood and his little party entered the room. Now the Queen had half expected the men to be rude and uncouth in appearance, because of their wild life in the forest, but she was delightfully disappointed. Indeed, she started back in surprise and almost clapped her hands. For, sooth to say, the yeoman made a brave sight, and in all the court no more gallant men could be found. Marian felt her cheeks glow with pride, at sight of the half-hidden looks of admiration sent forth by the other ladies in waiting. Robin had not forgot the gentle arts taught by his mother, and he wore his fine red velvet tunic and breeches with the grace of a courtier. We have seen before what a dandified gentleman Will Scarlet was, and Allan a Dale, the minstrel, was scarcely less goodly to look upon, while the giant Little John and broad-shouldered Will Stuteley made up in stature what little they lacked in outward polish. Mistress Dale, on her part, looked even more charming, if possible, than on the momentous day when she went to Plympton Church to marry one man and found another. Thus came the people of the greenwood before Queen Eleanor in her own private audience room, and Robin advanced and knelt down before her and said, "Here I am, Robin Hood, I and my chosen men. At your Majesty's bidding am I come, bearing the ring of amnesty which I will protect, as I would protect your Majesty's honor, with my life." "Thou art welcome, Locksley," said the Queen, smiling graciously. "Thou art come in good time, thou and all thy brave yeomanry." Then Robin presented each of his men in turn, and each fell on his knee and was greeted with most kindly words. And the Queen kissed fair Mistress Dale upon the cheek, and bade her remain in the palace with her ladies while she was in the city. And she made all the party be seated to rest themselves after their long journey. Fine wines were brought, and cake, and rich food, for their refreshment. And as they ate and drank, the Queen told them further of the tourney to be held at Finsbury Field, and of how she desired them to wear her colors and shoot for her. Meantime, she concluded, they were to lie by quietly and be known of no man. To do all this, Robin and his men pledged themselves full heartily. Then, at the Queen's request, they related to her and her ladies some of their merry adventures, whereat the listeners were vastly entertained and laughed heartily. Then Marian, who had heard of the wedding at Plympton Church, told it so drolly that tears stood in the Queen's eyes from merriment. "My Lord Bishop of Hereford," she said, "'twas indeed a comical business for him. I shall keep that to twit his bones, I promise you. So this is our minstrel?" she added presently, turning to Allan a Dale. "Methinks I have already heard of him. Will he not harp awhile for us today?" Allan bowed low, and took a harp which was brought to him, and he thrummed the strings and sang full sweetly the border songs of the north country. And the Queen and all her ladies listened in rapt silence till all the songs were ended. So ends chapter 12. Chapter 13 of Robin Hood by J. Walker McSpadden. This recording is in the public domain. How the Outlaws Shot in King Harry's Tourney. The King is into Finsbury Field, marching in battle ray, and after follows bold Robin Hood, and all his yeomen gay. The morning of the great archery contest dawned fair and bright, bringing with it a fever of impatience to every citizen of London town, from the proudest courtier to the lowest kitchen wench. Aye, and all the surrounding country was early awake too, and began to wend their way to Finsbury Field, a fine broad stretch of practice ground near Moorfields. Around three sides of the field were erected tier upon tier of seats for the spectators, with the royal boxes and booths for the nobility and gentry in the center. Down along one end were pitched gaily colored tents for the different bands of King's archers. There were 10 of these bands, each containing a score of men headed by a captain of great renown. So today there were 10 of the pavilions, each bearing aloft the royal arms and vari-colored pennants which fluttered lightly in the fresh morning breeze. Each captain's flag was of peculiar color and device. First came the royal purple streamer of Tepus, own bow-bearer to the King, and esteemed the finest archer in all the land. Then came the yellow of Clifton of Buckinghamshire, and the blue of Gilbert of the White Hand, he who was renowned in Nottinghamshire, and the green of Elwyn the Welshman, and the white of Robert of Cloudsdale. And after them 5 other captains of bands, each a man of proved prowess. As the Queen had said aforetime, the King was mightily proud of his archers. and now held this tourney to show their skill, and mayhap to recruit their forces. The uprising tiers of seats filled early, upon this summer morning, and the merry chatter of the people went abroad like the hum of bees in a hive. The royal party had not yet put in an appearance, nor were any of the King's archers visible. So the crowd was content to hide its impatience by laughing jibes passed from one section to another, and crying the colors of their favorite archers. In and out among the seats went hawkers, their arms laden with small pennants to correspond with the rival tents. Other vendors of pie and small cakes and cider also did a thrifty business, for so eager had some of the people been to get good seats, that they had rushed away from home without their breakfast. Suddenly the gates at the far end, next to the tents, opened wide, and a courier in scarlet and gold, mounted upon a white horse, rode in blowing lustily upon the trumpet at his lips, and behind him came 6 standard-bearers riding abreast. The populace arose with a mighty cheer. King Harry had entered the arena. He bestrode a fine white charger and was clad in a rich dark suit of slashed velvet with satin and gold facings. His hat bore a long curling ostrich plume of pure white, and he doffed it graciously in answer to the shouts of the people. By his side rode Queen Eleanor, looking regal and charming in her long brocade riding habit, while immediately behind them came Prince Richard and Prince John, each attired in knightly coats of mail and helmets. Lords and ladies of the realm followed, and finally the 10 companies of archers, whose progress round the field was greeted with hardly less applause than that given the King himself. The King and Queen dismounted from their steeds, ascended the steps of the royal box, and seated themselves upon 2 thrones, decked with purple and gold trapping, upon a dais sheltered by striped canvas. In the booths at each end the members of the court took their places, while comely pages ran hither and thither bearing the royal commands. 'Twas a lordly sight, I ween, these shifting of proud courtiers, flashing of jeweled fans, and commingling of bright colors with costly gems. Now the herald arose to command peace, and soon the clear note of his bugle rose above the roar of the crowd and hushed it to silence. The 10 archers ranged themselves in 2 long rows on each side of the lists, a gallant array, while their captains, as a special mark of favor, stood near the royal box. "Come hither, Tepus," said the King to his bow bearer. "Come, measure me out this line, how long our mark must be." "What is the reward?" then asked the Queen. "That will the herald presently proclaim," answered the King. "For first prize we have offered a purse containing 20 golden pounds, for second a purse containing 20 silver pennies, and for third a silver bugle, inlaid with gold. Moreover, if the King's companies keep these prizes, the winning companies shall have first 2 tons of Rhenish wine, second 2 tons of English beer, and third 5 of the fattest harts that run on Dalham Lea. Methinks that is a princely wager," added King Harry laughingly. Up spake bold Clifton, secure in the King's favor. "Measure no marks for us, most sovereign liege," quoth he. "For such largesse as that we'll shoot at the sun and the moon." "'Twill not be so far as that," said the King. "But get a line of good length, Tepus, and set up the targets at 10 paces." Forthwith Tepus bowed low and set up 10 targets, each bearing the pennant of a different company, while the herald stood forth again and proclaimed the rules and prizes. The entries were open to all comers. Each man also of the King's archers should shoot 3 arrows at the target bearing the colors of his band, until the best bowman in each band should be chosen. These 10 chosen archers should then enter a contest for an open target, 3 shots apiece, and here any other bowman whatsoever was asked to try his skill. The result at the open targets should decide the tourney. Then all the people shouted again in token that the terms of the contest pleased them, and the archers waved their bows aloft and wheeled into position facing their respective targets. The shooting now began, upon all the targets at once, and the multitude had so much ado to watch them that they forgot to shout. Besides, silence was commanded during the shooting. Of all the fine shooting that morning I have not now space to tell you. The full score of men shot 3 times at each target, and then 3 times again to decide a tie. for, more than once, the arrow shot by one man would be split wide open by his successor. Each man's shaft bore his number to ease the counting, and so close would they stick at the end of a round that the target looked like a big bristle hairbrush. Then must the spectators relieve their tense spirits by great cheering, while the King looked mighty proud of his skilled bowmen. At last the company targets were decided, and Tepus, as was expected, led the score, having made 6 exact centers in succession. Gilbert of the White Hand followed with 5, and Clifton with 4. 2 other captains had touched their center 4 times, but not roundly, while in the other companies it so chanced that the captains had been outshot by some of the men under them. The winners then saluted the King and Queen, and withdrew for a space to rest and renew their bowstrings for the keenest contest of all. While the lists were cleared and a new target, the open one, was set up at 12 score paces. At the bidding of the King, the herald announced that the open target was to be shot at, to decide the title of the best archer in all England, and any man there present was privileged to try for it. But so keen had been the previous shooting that many yeomen who had come to enter the list now would not do so, and only a dozen men stepped forth to give in their names. "By my halidom," said the King, "these must be hardy men to pit themselves against my archers." "Think you that your 10 chosen fellows are the best bowmen in all England?" asked the Queen. "Aye, and in all the world beside," answered the King, "and thereunto I would stake £500." "I am minded to take your wager," said the Queen musingly, "and will e'en do so if you grant me a boon." "What is it?" asked the King. "If I produce 5 archers who can outshoot your 10, will you grant my men full grace and amnesty?" "Assuredly," quoth the King in right good humor. "Natheless, I tell you now, your wager is in jeopardy, for there never were such bowmen as Tepus and Clifton and Gilbert." Said the Queen, puckering her brow, still as though lost in thought. "I must see if there be none present to aid me in my wager. Boy, call hither Sir Richard of the Lea and my Lord Bishop of Hereford." The 2 summoned ones, who had been witnessing the sport, came forward. "Sir Richard," said she, "thou art a full knight and good. Wouldst advise me to meet a wager of the King's, that I can produce other archers as good as Tepus and Gilbert and Clifton?" "Nay, your Majesty," he said, bending his knee, "there be none present that can match them. Howbeit," he added, dropping his voice, "I have heard of some who lie hid in Sherwood Forest who could show them strange targets." The Queen smiled and dismissed him. "Come hither, my Lord Bishop of Hereford," quoth she. "Wouldst thou advance a sum to support my wager against the King?" "Nay, your Majesty," said the fat bishop, "an you pardon me, I'd not lay down a penny on such a bet, for by my silver mitre the King's archers are men who have no peers." "But suppose I found men whom thou knewest to be masters at the bow," she insisted roguishly, "wouldst thou not back them? Belike I have heard that there be men round about Nottingham and Plympton who carry such matters with a high hand." The bishop glanced nervously around as if half expecting to see Robin Hood's men standing near, then turned to find the Queen looking at him with much amusement lurking in her eyes. "Odds bodkins, the story of my misadventure must have preceded me," he thought ruefully. Aloud he said, resolved to face it out, "Your Majesty, such tales are idle and exaggerated. An you pardon me, I would add to the King's wager that his men are invincible." "As it pleases thee," replied the Queen imperturbably. "How much?" "Here is my purse," said the bishop uneasily. "It contains 15 score nobles and near 100 pounds." "I'll take it at even money," she said, dismissing him. "And your Majesty," turning to the King, who had been conversing with the 2 princes and certain of the nobles, "I accept your wager of 500 pounds." "Very good," said the King, laughing as though it were a great jest. "But what had minded you to take such interest in the sport of a sudden?" "It is as I have said. I have found 5 men whom I will pit against any you may produce." "Then we will try their skill speedily," quoth the King. "How say you, if first we decide this open target, and then match the 5 best thereat against your unknown champions?" "Agreed," said the Queen. Thereupon she signed to Maid Marian to step forward from a near by booth where she sat with other ladies in waiting, and whispered something in her ear. Marian curtsied and withdrew. Now the 10 chosen archers from the King's bands came forth again and took their stand, and with them stood forth the 12 untried men from the open lists. Again the crowd was stilled, and every eye hung upon the speeding of the shafts. Slowly but skillfully each man shot, and as his shaft struck within the inner ring, a deep breath broke from the multitude like the sound of the wind upon the seashore. And now Gilbert of the White Hand led the shooting, and 'twas only by the space of a hair's breadth upon the line that Tepus tied his score. Stout Elwyn, the Welshman, took third place. One of the private archers, named Geoffrey, came fourth, while Clifton must needs content himself with fifth. The men from the open list shot fairly true, but nervousness and fear of ridicule wrought their undoing. Then the herald came forward again, and instead of announcing the prize winners, proclaimed that there was to be a final contest. 2 men had tied for first place, declared His Majesty the King, and 3 others were entitled to honors. Now all these 5 were to shoot again, and they were to be pitted against 5 other of the Queen's choosing, men who had not yet shot upon that day. A thrill of astonishment and excitement swept through the arena. Who were these men of the Queen's choosing? Was upon every lip. The hubbub of eager voices grew intense, and in the midst of it all, the gate at the far end of the field opened and 5 men entered and escorted a lady upon horseback across the arena to the royal box. The lady was instantly recognized as Mistress Marian of the Queen's household, but no one seemed to know the faces of her escort. 4 were clad in Lincoln green, while the 5th, who seemed to be the leader, was dressed in a brave suit of scarlet red. Each man wore a close-fitting cap of black, decked with a curling white feather. For arms they carried simply a stout bow, a sheaf of new arrows, and a short hunting knife. When the little party came before the dais upon which the King and Queen sat, the yeomen doffed their caps humbly, while Maid Marian was assisted to dismount. "Your gracious Majesty," she said, addressing the Queen, "these be the men for whom you sent me, and who are now come to wear your colors and service you in the tourney." The Queen leaned forward and handed them each a scarf of green and gold. "Locksley," she said in a clear voice, "I thank thee and thy men for this service. Know that I have laid a wager with the King that ye can outshoot the 5 best whom he has found in all his bowmen." The 5 men pressed the scarfs to their lips in token of fealty. The King turned to the Queen inquiringly. "Who are these men you have brought before us?" asked he. Up came the worthy Bishop of Hertford, growing red and pale by turns. "Your pardon, my liege lord," cried he, "but I must denounce these fellows as outlaws. Yon man in scarlet is none other than Robin Hood himself. The others are Little John and Will Stuteley and Will Scarlet and Allen a Dale, all famous in the north country for their deeds of violence." "As my Lord Bishop personally knows," added the Queen significantly. The King's brows grew dark. The name of Robin Hood was well known to him, as to every man there present. "Is this true?" he demanded sternly. "Aye, my lord," responded the Queen demurely. "But bethink you, I have your royal promise of grace and amnesty." "That will I keep," said the King, holding in check his ire by a mighty effort. "But look you, only 40 days do I grant of respite. When this time has elapsed, let these bold outlaws look to their safety." Then turning to his 5 victorious archers who had drawn near, he added, "Ye have heard, my men, how that I have a wager with the Queen upon your prowess. Now here be men of her choosing, certain free shafts of Sherwood and Barnesdale. Wherefore look well to it, Gilbert and Tepus and Geoffrey and Elwyn and Clifton. If ye outshoot these knaves, I will fill your caps with silver pennies, aye, and knight the man who stands first. But if ye lose, I give the prizes, for which ye have just striven, to Robin Hood and his men, according to my royal word." Robin Hood and his men! The saying flew around the arena with the speed of wildfire, and every neck craned forward to see the famous fellows who had dared to brave the King's anger because of the Queen. Another target was now set up, at the same distance as the last, and it was decided that the 10 archers should shoot 3 arrows in turn. Gilbert and Robin tossed up a penny for the lead, and it fell to the King's men. So Clifton was bidden to shoot first. Forth he stood, planting his feet firmly and wetting his fingers before plucking the string, for he was resolved to better his losing score of that day. And in truth he did so, for the shaft he loosed sped true, and landed on the black bull's-eye, though not in the exact center. Again he shot, and again he hit the black, on the opposite rim. The third shaft swerved downward and came within the second ring, some 2 fingers' breadths away. Natheless a general cry went up, as this was the best shooting Clifton had done that day. Will Scarlet was chosen to follow him, and now took his place and carefully chose 3 round and full feathered arrows. "Careful, my sweet coz," quoth Robin in a low tone. "The knave has left wide space at the center for all of your darts." But Robin gave Will the wrong caution, for overmuch care spoiled his aim. His first shaft flew wide and lodged in the second ring, even farther away than the worst shot of Clifton. "Your pardon, coz," quoth Robin hastily. "Bid care go to the bottom of the sea, and do you loose your string before it sticks to your fingers." And Will profited by this hint, and loosed his next 2 shafts as freely as though they flew along a Sherwood glade. Each struck upon the bull's-eye, and one even nearer the center than his rival's mark. Yet the total score was adjudged in favor of Clifton. At this Will Scarlet bit his lip, but said no word, while the crowd shouted and waved yellow flags for very joy that the King's man had overcome the outlaw. They knew also that this demonstration would please the King. The target was now cleared for the next 2 contestants, Geoffrey and Allen a Dale, whereat it was noticed that many ladies in the Queen's booths boldly flaunted Allen's colors, much to the honest pride which glowed in the cheeks of one who sat in their midst. "In good truth," said more than one lady to Mistress Dale, "if thy husband can handle the longbow as skilfully as the harp, his rival has little show of winning." The saying augured well. Geoffrey had shot many good shafts that day, and indeed had risen from the ranks by virtue of them. But now each of his 3 shots, though well placed in triangular fashion around the rim of the bull's-eye, yet allowed an easy space for Allen to graze within. His shooting, moreover, was so prettily done that he was right heartily applauded, the ladies and their gallants leading in the hand-clapping. Now you must know that there had long been a friendly rivalry in Robin Hood's band as to who was the best shot, next after Robin himself. He and Will Stuteley had lately decided their marksmanship, and Will had found that Robin's skill was now so great as to place the leader at the head of all good bowmen in the forest. But the second place lay between Little John and Stuteley, and neither wished to yield to the other. So today they looked narrowly at their leader to see who would shoot third. Robin read their faces at a glance, and laughing merrily, broke off 2 straws and held them out. "The long straw goes next," he decided, and it fell to Stuteley. Elwin the Welshman was to precede him, and his score was no whit better than Geoffrey's. But Stuteley failed to profit by it. His besetting sin in archery had ever been an undue haste and carelessness. Today these were increased by a certain moodiness, that Little John had outranked him. So his first 2 shafts flew swiftly, one after the other, to lodging places outside the Welshman's mark. "Man, man," cried Robin entreatingly, "you do forget the honor of the Queen, and the credit of Sherwood." "I ask your pardon, master," quoth Will humbly enough, and loosing as he spoke his last shaft. It whistled down the course unerringly and struck in the exact center, the best shot yet made. Now some shouted for Stuteley and some shouted for Elwin, but Elwin's total mark was declared the better. Whereupon the King turned to the Queen. "What say you now?" quoth he in some triumph. "2 out of the 3 first rounds have gone to my men. Your outlaws will have to shoot better than that in order to save your wager." The Queen smiled gently. "Yea, my lord," she said, "but the 2 who are left are able to do the shooting. You forget that I still have Little John and Robin Hood." "And you forget, my lady, that I still have Tepus and Gilbert." So each turned again to the lists and awaited the next rounds in silent eagerness. I ween that King Harry had never watched the invasion of an enemy with more anxiety than he now felt. Tepus was chosen to go next, and he fell into the same error with Will Scarlet. He held the string a moment too long, and both his first and second arrows came to grief. One of them, however, came within the black rim, and he followed it up by placing his third in the full center, just as Stuteley had done in his last. These 2 centers were the fairest shots that had been made that day, and loud was the applause which greeted this second one. But the shouting was as nothing to the uproar which followed Little John's shooting. That good-natured giant seemed determined to outdo Tepus by a tiny margin in each separate shot. For the first and the second shafts grazed his rivals on the inner side, while the third Little John did the old trick of the forest. He shot his own arrow in a graceful curve which descended from above Tepus's final center shaft with a glancing blow that drove the other out and left the outlaw's in its place. The King could scarce believe his eyes. "By my halidome," quoth he, "that fellow deserves either a dukedom or a hanging. He must be in league with Satan himself. Never saw I such shooting." "The score is tied, my lord," said the Queen. "We have still to see Gilbert and Robin Hood." Gilbert now took his stand and slowly shot his arrows, one after another, into the bull's eye. 'Twas the best shooting he had done yet, but there was still the smallest of spaces left, if you looked closely, at the very center. "Well done, Gilbert," spoke up Robin Hood. "You are a foeman worthy of being shot against." He took his own place as he spoke. "Now if you had placed one of your shafts there," loosing one of his own, "and another there," out sped the second, "and another there," the third was launched. Mayhap the King would have declared you the best bowman in all England. But the last part of his merry speech was drowned in the wild tumult of applause which followed his exploit. His first two shafts had packed themselves into the small space left at the bull's eye, while his third had split down between them, taking half of each and making all three appear from a distance as one immense arrow. Up rose the King in amazement and anger. "Gilbert is not yet beaten," he cried. "Did he not shoot within the mark thrice? And that is allowed a best in all the rules of archery." Robin bowed low. "As it please your Majesty," quoth he, "but may I be allowed to place the mark for the second shooting?" The King waved his hand sullenly. Thereupon Robin prepared another old trick of the greenwood, and got him a light peeled willow wand, which he set in the ground in place of the target. "There, friend Gilbert," cried he gaily, "belike you can hit that." "I can scarce see it from here," said Gilbert, "much less hit it. Natheless, for the King's honor, I will try." But this final shot proved his undoing, and his shaft flew harmlessly by the thin white streak. Then came Robin to his stand again, and picked his arrow with exceeding care, and tried his string. Amid a breathless pause he drew the good yew bow back to his ear, glanced along the shaft, and let the feathered missile fly. Straight it sped, singing a keen note of triumph as it went. The willow wand was split in twain, as though it had met a hunter's knife. "Verily, I think your bow is armed with witchcraft," cried Gilbert, "for I did not believe such shooting possible." "You should come to see our merry lads in the greenwood," retorted Robin lightly, "for willow wands do not grow upon the cobblestones of London town." Meanwhile the King in great wrath had risen to depart, first signing the judges to distribute the prizes. Never a word said he, of good or ill, to the Queen, but mounted his horse, and followed by his sons and knights rode off the field. The archers dropped upon one knee as he passed, but he gave them a single baleful look and was gone. Then the Queen beckoned the outlaws to approach, and they did so and knelt at her feet. "Right well have ye served me," she said, "and sorry am I that the King's anger is aroused thereby. But fear ye not, his word and grace hold true. As to these prizes ye have gained, I add others of my own. The wagers I have won from his Majesty the King, and from the Lord Bishop of Hereford. Buy with some of these moneys the best swords ye can find in London for all your band, and call them the swords of the Queen, and swear with them to protect all the poor and the helpless and the womenkind who come your way." "We swear," said the five yeomen solemnly. Then the Queen gave each of them her hand to kiss, and arose and departed with all her ladies. And after they were gone, the King's archers came crowding around Robin and his men, eager to get a glimpse of the fellows about whom they had heard so much. And back of them came a great crowd of the spectators, pushing and jostling in their efforts to come nearer. "Verily," laughed Little John, "they must take us for a merry andrew show." Now the judges came up and announced each man his prize, according to the King's command. To Robin was give the purse containing 20 golden pounds, to Little John the 20 silver pennies, and to Allan a Dale the fine inlaid bugle, much to his delight, for he was skilled at blowing sweet tunes upon the horn, hardly less than handling the harp strings. But when the Rhenish wine and English beer and hearts of Dalham Lee were spoken of, Robin said, "Nay, what need we of wine or beer so far from the greenwood? And 'twould be like carrying coals to Newcastle to drive those hearts to Sherwood. Now Gilbert and Tepus and their men have shot passing well, wherefore the meat and drink must go to them, and they will accept it of us." "Right gladly," replied Gilbert, grasping his hand. "Ye are good men all, and we will toast you every one in memory of the greatest day at archery that England has ever seen or ever will see." Thus said all the King's archers, and the hand of good fellowship was given amid much shouting and clapping on the shoulder blades. And so ended King Harry's tourney, whose story has been handed down from sire to son, even unto the present day. So ends Chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Robin Hood by J. Walker McSpadden. This recording is in the public domain. How Robin Hood was sought of the tinker. And while the tinker fell asleep, Robin made haste away, and left the tinker in the lurch for the great shot to pay. King Henry was as good as his word. Robin Hood and his party were suffered to depart from London, the parting bringing keen sorrow to Marian, and for 40 days no hand was raised against them. But at the end of that time the royal word was sent to the worthy Sheriff at Nottingham that he must lay hold upon the outlaws without further delay, as he valued his office. Indeed, the exploits of Robin and his band, ending with the great tourney in Finsbury Field, had made a mighty stir through all England, and many there were to laugh boldly at the Nottingham official for his failures to capture the outlaws. The Sheriff thereupon planned 3 new expeditions into the greenwood, and was even brave enough to lead them, since he had 15 score men at his beck and call each time. But never the shadow of an outlaw did he see, for Robin's men lay close, and the Sheriff's men knew not how to come at their chief hiding place in the cove before the cavern. Now the Sheriff's daughter had hated Robin Hood bitterly in her heart ever since the day he refused to bestow upon her the golden arrow, and shamed her before all the company. His tricks also upon her father were not calculated to lessen her hatred, and so she sought about for means to aid the Sheriff in catching the enemy. "There is no need to go against this man with force of arms," she said. "We must meet his tricks with other tricks of our own." "Would that we could," groaned the Sheriff. "The fellow is becoming a nightmare unto me." "Let me plan a while," she replied. "Belike I can cook up some scheme for his undoing." "Agreed," said the Sheriff, "and if anything comes of your planning, I will even give you 100 silver pennies for a new gown and a double reward to the man who catches the outlaws." Now upon that same day, while the Sheriff's daughter was racking her brains for a scheme, there came to the mansion house a strolling tinker named Middle, a great gossip and braggart. And as he pounded away upon some pots and pans in the scullery, he talked loudly about what he would do if he once came within reach of that rascal Robin Hood. "It might be that this simple fellow could do something through his very simplicity," mused the Sheriff's daughter, overhearing his prattle. "Odds bodkins, 'twill do no harm to try his service, while I bethink myself of some better plan." And she called him to her, and looked him over. A big brawny fellow enough, with an honest look about the eye, and a countenance so open that when he smiled his mouth seemed the only country on the map. "I am minded to try your skill at outlaw catching," she said, "and will add goodly measure to the stated reward if you succeed. Do you wish to make good your boasted prowess?" The tinker grinned broadly. "Yes, your ladyship," he said. "Then here is a warrant made out this morning by the Sheriff himself. See that you keep it safely and use it to good advantage." And she dismissed him. Middle departed from the house mightily pleased with himself and proud of his commission. He swung his crab-tree staff recklessly in his glee, so recklessly that he imperiled the shins of more than one angry passer-by, and vowed he'd crack the ribs of Robin Hood with it, though he was surrounded by every outlaw in the whole greenwood. Spurred on by the thoughts of his own coming bravery, he left the town and proceeded toward Barnesdale. The day was hot and dusty, and at noontime he paused at a wayside inn to refresh himself. He began by eating and drinking and dozing in turn, then sought to do all at once. Mine host of the Seven Does stood by, discussing the eternal Robin with a drover. Folk do say that my lord sheriff has sent into Lincoln for more men at arms and horses, and that when he has these behind him, he'll soon rid the forest of these fellows. "Of whom speak you?" asked the Tinker, sitting up. "Of Robin Hood and his men," said the host. "But go to sleep again. You will never get the reward." "And why not?" asked the Tinker, rising with great show of dignity. "Where our sheriff has failed, and the stout Guy of Gisborne, and many more beside, it behoves not a mere tinker to succeed." The Tinker laid a heavy hand upon the innkeeper's fat shoulder, and tried to look impressive. "This is your reckoning, host, upon the table. I must even go upon my way, because I have more important business than to stand here gossiping with you. But be not surprised if, the next time you see me, I shall have with me no less person than Robin Hood himself." And he strode loftily out the door and walked up the hot white road towards Barnesdale. He had not gone above a quarter of a mile when he met a young man with curling brown hair and merry eyes. The young man carried his light cloak over his arm, because of the heat, and was unarmed save for a light sword at his side. The newcomer eyed the perspiring Tinker in a friendly way, and seeing he was a stout fellow, accosted him. "Good day to you," said he. "Good day to you," said the Tinker, "and a morrow less heating." "Aye," laughed the other. "Whence come you? And know you the news?" "What is the news?" said the gossipy Tinker, pricking up his ear. "I am a tinker by trade, Middle by name, and come over against Banbury." "Why, as for the news," laughed the stranger, "I hear that 2 tinkers were set in the stocks for drinking too much ale and beer." "If that be all your news," retorted Middle, "I can beat you clear to the end of the lane." "What news have you? Seeing that you go from town to town, I ween you can outdo a poor country yokel at tidings." "All I have to tell," said the other, "is that I am especially commissioned," he felt mightily proud of these big words, "especially commissioned to seek a bold outlaw which they call Robin Hood." "So," said the other, arching his brows. "How especially commissioned?" "I have a warrant from the sheriff, sealed with the King's own seal, to take him where I can. And if you can tell me where he is, I will e'en make a man of you." "Let me see the warrant," said the other, "to satisfy myself if it be right, and I will do the best I can to bring him to you." "That will I not," replied the Tinker. "I will trust none with it, and if you'll not help me to come at him, I must forsooth catch him by myself." And he made his crabtree staff whistle shrill circles in the air. The other smiled at the Tinker's simplicity, and said, "The middle of the road on a hot July day is not a good place to talk things over. Now if you're the man for me and I'm the man for you, let's go back to the inn just beyond the bend of road and quench our thirst and cool our heads for thinking." "Marry, come up," quoth the Tinker. "That I will. For though I've just come from there, my thirst rises mightily at the sound of your voice." So back he turned with the stranger and proceeded to the Seven Does. The landlord arched his eyebrows silently when he saw the 2 come in, but served them willingly. The Tinker asked for wine, and Robin for ale. The wine was not the most cooling drink in the cellar, nor the clearest headed. Natheless the Tinker asked for it, since it was expensive and the other man had invited him to drink. They lingered long over their cups, Master Middle emptying one after another, while the stranger expounded at great length on the best plans for coming at and capturing Robin Hood. In the end the Tinker fell sound asleep while in the act of trying to get a tankard to his lips. Then the stranger deftly opened the snoring man's pouch, took out the warrant, read it, and put it in his own wallet. Calling mine host to him, he winked at him with a half smile, and told him the Tinker would pay the whole score when he awoke. Thus was Master Middle left in the lurch, for the great shot to pay. Natheless the stranger seemed in no great hurry. He had the whim to stay a while and see what the droll Tinker might do when he awoke. So he hid behind a window shutter on the outside and awaited events. Presently the Tinker came to himself with a prodigious yawn, and reached at once for another drink. "What were you saying, friend, about the best plan for catching this fellow?" Hello! Where's the man gone?" He had looked around, and saw no one with him at the table. "Host! Host!" he shouted. "Where is that fellow who was to pay my reckoning?" "I know not," answered the landlord sharply. "Mayhap he left the money in your purse." "No, he didn't," roared Middle, looking therein. "Help! Help! I've been robbed! Look you, host, you are liable to arrest for high treason. I am here upon the king's business, as I told you earlier in the day, and yet, while I did rest under your roof, thinking you were an honest man and one loving of the king, my pouch has been opened and many matters of state taken from it." "Cease your bellowing," said the landlord. "What did you lose?" "Oh, many weighty matters, I do assure you. I had with me, item, a warrant, granted under the hand of my Lord High Sheriff of Nottingham, and sealed with the king's own seal, for the capture and arrest and overcoming of the notorious rascal one Robin Hood of Barnesdale. Item, 1 crust of bread. Item, 1 lump of solder. Item, 3 pieces of twine. Item, 6 single keys, useful withal. Item, 12 silver pennies, the which I earned this week in fair labor. Item—" "Have done with your items," said the host, "and I marvel greatly to hear you speak in such fashion of your friend, Robin Hood of Barnesdale, for was he not with you in all good fellowship?" "What? That Robin Hood?" gasped Middle with staring eyes. "Why did you not tell me?" "Faith, I saw no need of telling you. Did you not tell me the first time you were here today that I need not be surprised if you came back with no less person than Robin Hood himself?" "Jesu, give me pardon," moaned the tinker. "I see it all now. He got me to drinking, and then took my warrant, and my pennies, and my crust." "Yes, yes," interrupted the host, "I know all about that. But pay me the score for both of you." "But I have no money, gossip. Let me go after that vile bag of bones, and I'll soon get it out of him." "Not so," replied the other. "If I waited for you to collect from Robin Hood, I would soon close up shop." "What is the account?" asked Middle. 10 shillings, just." "Then take here my working bag and my good hammer too, and if I light upon that knave, I will soon come back after them." "Give me your leathern coat as well," said mine host. "The hammer and bag of tools are as naught to me." "Gray mercy!" cried Master Middle, losing what was left of his temper. "It seems that I have escaped one thief only to fall into the hands of another. If you will but walk with me out into the middle of the road, I will give you such a crack as shall drive some honesty into your thick skull." "You are wasting your breath and my time," retorted the landlord. "Give me your things, and get you gone after your man, speedily." Middle thought this to be good advice, so he strode forth from the Seven Does in a black mood. Ere he had gone half a mile, he saw Robin Hood walking demurely among the trees a little in front of him. "Ho there, you villain!" roared the tinker. "Stay your steps. I am desperately in need of you this day." Robin turned about with a surprised face. "What knave is this," he asked gently, "who comes shouting after me?" "No knave at all," panted the other, rushing up, "but an honest man who would have that warrant and the money for drink." "Why, as I live, it is our honest tinker who was seeking Robin Hood. Did you find him, gossip?" "Marry, that did I, and I'm now going to pay him my respects." And he plunged at him, making a sweeping stroke with his crab-tree cudgel. Robin tried to draw his sword, but could not do it for a moment through dodging the other's furious blows. When he did get it in hand, the tinker had reached him thrice with resounding thwacks. Then the tables were turned, for he dashed in right manfully with his shining blade and made the tinker give back again. The greenwood rang with the noise of the fray. 'Twas steel against wood, and they made a terrible clattering when they came together. Robin thought at first that he could hack the cudgel to pieces, for his blade was one of Toledo finely tempered steel which the Queen had given him. But the crab-tree staff had been fired and hardened and seasoned by the tinker's arts until it was like a bar of iron, no pleasant neighbor for one's ribs. Robin presently found this out to his sorrow. The long reach and long stick got to him when 'twas impossible for him to touch his antagonist, so his sides began to ache sorely. "Hold your hand, tinker," he said at length. "I cry a boon of you." "Before I do it," said the tinker, I'd hang you on this tree." But even as he spoke, Robin found the moment's grace for which he longed, and immediately grasped his horn and blew the three well-known blasts of the greenwood. "A murrain seize you!" roared the tinker, commencing afresh. "Up to your old tricks again, are you? Well, I'll have time to finish my job if I hurry." But Robin was quite able to hold his own at a pinch, and they had not exchanged many lunges and passes when up came Little John and Will Scarlet and a score of yeomen at their heels. Middle was seized without ceremony, while Robin sat himself down to breathe. "What is the matter," quoth Little John, "that you should sit so weariedly upon the highway side?" "Faith, that rascally tinker yonder has paid his score well upon my hide," answered Robin ruefully. "That tinker, then," said Little John, "must be itching for more work. Fain would I try if he can do as much for me." "Or me," said Will Scarlet, who, like Little John, was always willing to swing a cudgel. "Nay," laughed Robin, "belike I could have done better an he had given me time to pull a young tree up by the roots. But I hated to spoil the Queen's blade upon his tough stick, or no less tough hide. He had a warrant for my arrest which I stole from him." "Also, item, 12 silver pennies," interposed the tinker, unsubdued. "Item, 1 crust of bread, against my supper. Item, 1 lump of solder. Item, 3 pieces of twine. Item, 6 single keys. Item—" "Yes, I know," quoth the merry Robin. "I stood outside the landlord's window and heard you count over your losses. Here they are again, and the silver pennies are turned by magic into gold. Here also, if you will, is my hand." "I take it heartily, with the pence," cried Middle. "By my leathern coat and tools, which I shall presently have out of that sly host, I swear that I never yet met a man I liked as well as you. And you and your men here will take me. I swear I'll serve you honestly. Do you want a tinker? Nay, but verily you must. Who else can mend and grind your swords and patch your pannikins, and fight too when occasions serve? Mend your pots, mend your pans!" And he ended his speech with the sorniest cry of his craft. By this time the whole band was laughing uproariously at the tinker's talk. "What say you, fellows?" asked Robin. "Would not this tinker be a good recruit?" "That he would," answered Will Scarlet, clapping the new man on the back. "He will keep Friar Tuck and Much the miller's son from having the blues." So amid great merriment and right good fellowship the outlaws shook Middle by the hand, and he took oath of fealty, and thought no more of the Sheriff's daughter. So ends chapter 14.